Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you a tale of self-discovery, love, and the courage to break free from the chains of privilege. Follow Ava, a young woman born into unimaginable wealth, who decides to leave it all behind to find her true self. Along the way, she meets Eli, a mechanic with dreams of his own, and together, they face the challenges of honesty, trust, and love. Can Ava escape her past and build a life on her own terms? Let's begin this inspiring journey together. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on more heartwarming stories. Ava's life, to the outside world, was nothing short of perfect. Growing up in a mansion in the heart of Los Angeles, surrounded by luxury and excess, she had everything that most people could only dream of. Her father, Mr. Anderson, was a self-made billionaire, one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. His wealth was immeasurable: mansions, expensive cars, private jets. Ava had everything a person could want: designer clothes, private tutors, vacations to exotic places, and an endless supply of material possessions. But none of it ever brought her the peace or happiness she craved. It wasn't the things that were missing. It was the people. Ava never felt like she truly belonged in the world her father had built for her. It seemed that everyone who came into her life only saw the surface, the money, the name, the extravagant lifestyle. No one saw her, the real Ava. Not the daughter of a billionaire. Not the girl who had everything. She felt like an object, an accessory to her father's empire, rather than an individual with her own dreams, desires, and struggles. One evening, as she sat in her massive bedroom, staring out at the glittering city lights of LA, a familiar emptiness washed over her. The lights of the city sparkled, casting a false sense of glamour over the sprawling metropolis. But Ava felt none of the magic, the noise, the chaos. It all seemed distant from the life she felt trapped in. Her mother, Mrs. Anderson, walked into the room, breaking her reverie. She was dressed in a vibrant green dress, her gold jewelry clinking with every step. Ava didn't even look up from the window as her mother approached. "Ava, why are you still in here?" Mrs. Anderson asked. "Your father wants to talk to you downstairs." Ava sighed, rolling her eyes. She was already well aware of what this conversation would be about. It was always the same. "What does he want now?" Ava muttered, barely turning to face her mother. Mrs. Anderson's face tightened, though she hid it with a smile. "It's about your future. Ava, you're not getting any younger. You need to settle down with someone who can take care of you." Ava's chest tightened with frustration. She could already feel the anger rising. "Take care of me? Mom, I can take care of myself. I don't need some rich stranger to marry me. I don't even know him." Her mother frowned, her brows furrowing as she looked at Ava. "Don't raise your voice at me. Ava, we're doing this for your own good. Do you know how many girls would kill to live the life you have? You're being ungrateful." Ava's eyes widened in disbelief. "Ungrateful? I'm ungrateful because I don't want to be sold off to some businessman's son as if I'm some kind of property." Just as the tension in the room escalated, Ava heard the familiar deep voice of her father echo from the hallway. "What's going on here?" Mr. Anderson stepped into the room, towering over both of them. His presence was commanding, and Ava immediately felt her frustration bubbling over. "Daddy, you can't keep controlling my life like this," Ava said, her voice rising despite herself. "I want to live for me, not for what you think is best for me." Mr. Anderson's face darkened as he stepped closer. His voice was cold and firm. "And what exactly do you know about living? Ava, do you know how hard I've worked to give you this life? Do you know the sacrifices I've made? And now you're telling me you don't want to listen to us?" Ava's fists clenched at her sides. "I never asked for all of this," she shouted, the tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't ask to be born into this family. I just want to be myself. Is that too much to ask?" Mr. Anderson's expression hardened. You're acting like a child. Ava. You think the world outside is easy. You wouldn't last a day without the comfort we've given you. The weight of his words crashed into her. But Ava was determined not to back down. Maybe I need to find out for myself, she said defiantly, her voice unwavering. Her parents looked at her as if she had lost her mind. Her mother quickly placed a hand on her husband's arm, her voice dripping with condescension. She doesn't mean that, darling. She's just being dramatic. But Ava meant every word. That night, as she lay in her bed staring up at the ceiling, her mind raced. She knew she couldn't live like this any longer. She had to prove to herself, and to her parents, that she could survive without their money, without the weight of their expectations. The next morning, when the house was still quiet, Ava made a decision. She packed a small bag, leaving behind her designer outfits and expensive shoes. She stuffed a notebook and pen into the bag along with the little money she had saved from her allowance. She wouldn't tell anyone where she was going, not even her best friend, Layla. The less anyone knew, the better. As she stood at the front door, ready to leave the life she had always known, Ava took a deep breath. She could already feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. But this was the only way she could find peace. The only way she could discover who she truly was. She left the house without a word to anyone, slipping into a cab that would take her far away from the luxury she had come to despise. She headed to Soria, a busy, bustling area far from her family's wealthy neighborhood. The streets were filled with the noise of people hustling to make a living. And for the first time in her life, Ava felt a sense of freedom. It was a world she had never known, but one that she was eager to experience. She found a small guest house and paid for a room. It wasn't anything like her lavish bedroom back home, but it didn't matter. There was something liberating about it. No golden chandeliers, no plush velvet couches, just a bed, a fan, and a tiny bathroom. To Ava, it felt like freedom. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: this was the first step toward living life on her own terms. The days after Ava's departure from her family's mansion were a whirlwind of unfamiliarity and uncertainty. The world outside the gilded gates of her father's estate was completely different from the luxury she had known her entire life. In her quiet room at the small guest house in Soria, Ava was left to face the reality of her decision. No longer surrounded by the comforts of her wealthy upbringing, she was now in a neighborhood where survival wasn't guaranteed. The noise from the busy streets outside, the sounds of people hustling to make ends meet, was both overwhelming and liberating. The first morning, after a restless night of sleep, Ava woke up early. The guest house was basic, nothing like the lavish comfort of her mansion, but she found peace in its simplicity. She stood at the window, watching the busy streets below. The world seemed chaotic, but it was real. Real in a way that Ava had never experienced before. She had left everything behind to live in a world of uncertainty. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Her resolve strengthened that morning. She had made this decision not just for herself, but to prove that she was capable of surviving outside the suffocating expectations of her family. Ava wasn't just running away from her parents' demands, she was running toward something new. Something real. But as she stepped out into the streets of Soria later that day, Ava quickly realized how hard it would be to make a life for herself. The job search was more difficult than she had anticipated. Most of the businesses she approached turned her away. Some laughed at her. Others just shook their heads. "You look too soft for the kind of work we need," they would say. Ava's carefully manicured appearance and polished demeanor were glaring signs that she wasn't prepared for the demanding work the area required. No one could see past the designer clothes or the polished facade of the daughter of a billionaire. They saw only the image of someone who had never known real work. Each rejection was a blow to Ava's ego. But she refused to let it stop her. She didn't want to go back home, tail between her legs. She had made her decision, and she would stick to it. A few days later, Ava found herself walking into a small eatery that smelled of freshly cooked food. The rich scent of jollof rice filling the air. The place was called Marnie's Cafe, a humble corner spot with a faded signboard. The bustling environment, the chatter of customers, and the clattering of dishes gave the place a warm and inviting atmosphere. It was different from anything Ava had ever known, but for some reason, she felt drawn to it. The moment she stepped inside, a woman behind the counter noticed her. Marnie, a stout woman with a no-nonsense attitude, wiped her hands on a bright yellow apron and gave Ava a skeptical look. Ava felt her nerves tighten, but she pushed forward. "I'm looking for a job," Ava said, trying to sound confident despite her inner doubts. Marnie raised an eyebrow. "You want to work here?" she asked, her tone firm but not unkind. Ava hesitated but nodded. "Yes. I can help in any way. I just want a chance." Marnie studied her for a moment, clearly unsure. "You don't look like someone who knows how to hustle. You sure you can handle this kind of work?" Ava's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea how hard this would be, but she couldn't give up. "I can learn," she replied quickly, her voice more confident than she felt. Marnie looked her over again, then sighed. "All right. Come tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. sharp. If you're late, don't bother coming back." Ava's relief was palpable. She had gotten the chance she needed. That night, she lay in her guesthouse bed with a new sense of purpose. The next morning, she arrived at Marnie's Cafe before the sun rose. Wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, her mind was racing with the thought of starting something new, of finally proving to herself that she could succeed on her own. The work was harder than Ava could have ever imagined. Carrying heavy trays, washing endless plates, and dealing with impatient customers quickly wore her down. She was completely out of her element. The cafe was busy, with construction workers, traders, and everyday people all shouting their orders. Ava tried to keep up, but it was overwhelming. At one point, she tripped over a chair leg and nearly spilled a plate of jollof rice on a customer's lap. The customer scowled at her, making her feel even more self-conscious. "Be careful," he snapped. Ava quickly apologized, trying to laugh it off, but she couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy that weighed on her. This wasn't the life she was used to, the life where everything had been handed to her without question. This was real work, and she wasn't sure if she was cut out for it. But despite the overwhelming challenges, there was a part of Ava that was oddly satisfied. She was doing something real for the first time in her life. By the end of the day, her arms ached, her feet were sore, and her mind was exhausted. But there was a strange sense of pride in her exhaustion. For the first time, Ava felt like she was working toward something meaningful. She wasn't just someone's daughter. She was becoming someone who could take care of herself. Someone who wasn't defined by her wealth or her family name. That night, as Ava lay in her small room, she thought about her parents, about the life she had left behind. She missed the familiarity of her old world. But it felt distant now. She had made her choice, and she couldn't go back. What mattered now was forging her own path. The road ahead was uncertain, and there would be many more challenges to face. But for the first time, Ava felt in control of her own life. She had taken the first step toward becoming the person she was meant to be. The days at Marnie's Cafe began to blur together, each one marked by the same routine of rushing around, carrying trays, cleaning dishes, and trying to keep up with the chaotic rhythm of the cafe. Ava had never imagined that working in such a busy place would be so physically demanding. She had spent most of her life in the comfort of a mansion, surrounded by luxury and hired help, never needing to lift a finger. But now, here she was, hustling every day to prove that she could make it on her own. At first, things had been difficult. She had stumbled, spilled drinks, and embarrassed herself in front of customers more than once. But with each day, she grew more confident. She learned how to carry multiple trays at once, how to deal with rude customers, and how to work efficiently in the kitchen without breaking a sweat. Slowly but surely, she was earning the respect of her co-workers. Marnie, the owner, had been tough on her at first, but Ava could tell that the woman respected her determination. Grace, another worker at the cafe, was a little more skeptical. She had a sharp tongue and didn't hesitate to tease Ava about her inexperience. Still, Ava didn't let it get to her. She had come here to prove something, not just to her parents but to herself. She was no longer the pampered daughter of a billionaire. She was Ava, an independent woman working hard to make her own way in the world. One afternoon, as the lunch rush started to slow down, Ava found herself wiping down tables when a familiar face walked in. It was Eli, the mechanic she had met a few days earlier. He was wearing his usual grease-stained t-shirt and jeans, his bright smile lighting up the cafe as he walked up to the counter. "Good afternoon, Marnie," Eli said, his voice warm and cheerful. "Hey, Eli. The usual?" Marnie asked as she scribbled down his order. "Yeah, thanks," Eli replied, before turning to Ava, who had just walked over with a tray of drinks. "Hey, Ava. How's it going?" Ava froze for a moment. She hadn't expected him to notice her, let alone speak to her. But his easygoing demeanor made her feel at ease. "I'm good," Ava said, trying to sound confident. "Just getting the hang of things here." Eli raised an eyebrow, his grin widening. "You sure? You look like you're handling it like a pro now." Ava couldn't help but smile at his compliment. "It's been a lot of hard work. But yeah, I'm getting there." He nodded approvingly. "I can tell. You're doing great." As the days went by, Eli became a regular at the cafe, coming in almost every afternoon for a quick meal. He would sit at his usual table, and Ava would bring him his food, always striking up a conversation. Their chats were casual at first about the weather, the cafe's food, and the latest news in the neighborhood, but soon, they began to talk more about their lives, their dreams, and their struggles. Eli was passionate about cars. He worked as a mechanic at a nearby shop, and he often talked about his plans to one day open his own auto repair business. Ava was fascinated by the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about his work. She admired his ambition, his determination to build something for himself despite not having much. One afternoon, as the cafe started to clear out, Eli turned to Ava with a more serious look on his face. "You know, Ava," he began, his tone thoughtful. "I've been thinking about something lately." Ava looked up, curious. "What's that?" Eli hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I've been doing this mechanic thing for a while now, and it's been tough, but I really want to take it to the next level. I want to open my own shop. I've got all these ideas, but I don't know if I can make it happen on my own." Ava's heart went out to him. She knew the struggle of trying to make a dream come true when the odds seemed stacked against you. "I think you can do it," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You're passionate about it. That's half the battle." Eli smiled, though there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. "Thanks, Ava. That means a lot." Ava sat down across from him, her own thoughts racing. She had always been so focused on escaping her past, on proving she could live without her father's money, that she hadn't really thought about the future. But now, as she listened to Eli talk about his dreams, she realized that maybe she wanted to be a part of something bigger than just surviving. Maybe she could help Eli with his dream. She had skills, knowledge from her privileged upbringing that might be useful. But she didn't know how to bring it up to him. She didn't want him to feel like she was offering help just because of her wealth. She wanted to prove herself on her own terms, just as he had done. As the weeks passed, Ava's relationship with Eli grew deeper. They spent more time together, talking late into the evening about their aspirations, fears, and the things that kept them up at night. She started to realize how much she valued their conversations, how much she enjoyed just being around him. He was the first person who had truly seen her for who she was. Not as the daughter of a billionaire, but as Ava, someone who was learning to navigate the world on her own. One evening, after the cafe had closed for the night, Eli walked Ava home, as he often did. The streets were quieter now, the hustle of the day fading into the calm of the night. Ava felt a strange warmth in her chest as they walked side by side, their footsteps in sync. "So," Eli said, breaking the silence, "have you thought any more about what you want to do?" Ava looked up at him, unsure of how to respond. "I'm still figuring that out," she said. "But I'm starting to realize that maybe I don't need to figure it out all at once. Maybe I can just take it one step at a time." Eli smiled at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "That's the right way to do it." They walked in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air. For the first time in a long while, Ava felt at peace. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't need to. What mattered was that she was moving forward, one step at a time, on her own terms. And with Eli by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges came her way. Ava's life at Marnie's cafe had started to settle into a rhythm. The physical exhaustion, the busy days, and the hum of conversation had become a familiar backdrop to her new existence. But in the quiet moments between serving food and washing dishes, Ava couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was living a double life. She had made a decision to leave the wealth and comfort of her father's mansion behind, to prove to herself that she could survive without their money. But what she hadn't prepared for was the weight of the secret she was carrying. Eli had become more than just a friend. He was someone Ava felt she could trust. Someone who saw her for who she was, not for the wealth she came from. Over the past few weeks, their bond had deepened. They shared their hopes, fears, and dreams. And with each conversation, Ava felt a connection she had never experienced before. But there was still a wall between them. Ava couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth that she was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country. She had left that life behind. She had left her father's expectations, her mother's controlling ways, and the constant pressure of her family's name. But every time she looked into Eli's kind eyes, the fear of him discovering the truth grew. Would he still see her as the same person if he knew who she really was? Would he be able to accept her, knowing that the struggles she had been so desperate to escape had always been of her own making, not because of the hardships others faced? One evening, as Ava sat on the steps outside the cafe, she watched Eli from across the room. He was bent over a notebook, scribbling something down, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was something so genuine about him, something that made her feel grounded, even in the midst of the chaos she had left behind. And yet, the secret she was keeping from him was like an anchor around her heart, pulling her down into uncertainty. Eli noticed her sitting by herself and walked over, his usual warm smile lighting up his face. "You look deep in thought," he remarked, sitting down beside her. Ava gave him a small smile, trying to hide the turmoil swirling inside her. "Just thinking," she said. "About everything." "Everything?" Eli's voice was gentle, understanding. "Is it something I can help with?" Ava hesitated. The weight of her secret pressed on her chest. She had never been good at sharing her burdens, especially not with someone like Eli, someone who was so far removed from the life she had known. But the thought of carrying this alone any longer was unbearable. "I don't know how to explain it," Ava said, her voice soft. "I don't know if you'll understand." Eli looked at her intently, his eyes filled with concern. "You don't have to explain it all at once. But if you ever need to talk, I'm here." Ava swallowed hard. She didn't know why she was holding back, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth just yet. "Thanks, Eli," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll figure it out." The following week, things at the cafe grew busier as the holiday season approached. Marnie had hired a few more workers to help with the influx of customers, and the place was filled with the sounds of chatter and clinking silverware. Ava threw herself into the work, using the hustle and bustle as a way to distract herself from the feelings she had been grappling with. She spent her days rushing from one task to the next, never stopping long enough to think about the secret she was hiding. But no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't escape the fact that her connection with Eli had grown deeper. He had become an important part of her life, someone she looked forward to seeing every day. And yet, the more she got to know him, the more she feared that her secret would tear them apart. What if he found out and couldn't look at her the same way again? What if the life she was trying to escape was the very thing that would keep them apart? One night, after the cafe had closed and the last customer had left, Ava sat alone in the back room, cleaning up. Her thoughts were swirling again, and she couldn't focus on the task at hand. She needed to talk to someone, to get the weight of her secret off her chest. But who could she talk to? Her mother? No. Her father? Absolutely not. The only person who had seen her for who she truly was, who had listened to her without judgment, was Eli. Ava knew that if she was going to be honest with him, it had to be soon. But there was a part of her that was terrified. Terrified of losing him. Terrified of the consequences that would come with revealing the truth. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew that keeping this secret any longer wasn't going to work. Eventually, the truth would come out, and she would have to face it. As if on cue, the bell above the cafe's door jingled, and Eli walked in. Ava's heart skipped a beat. He had a small smile on his face. But there was something different about the way he looked at her tonight, something more serious. More intense. "Hey," he said, walking up to her. "I need to talk to you about something." Ava's heart sank. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel the tension between them growing. Was he about to confront her about the secret she had been hiding? "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Eli took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately," he said, his voice quiet. "And I've realized something." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "What?" He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "I care about you, Ava. More than I've ever cared about anyone." Ava's heart began to race. His words, so simple yet so profound, hit her harder than she had anticipated. She had known that she cared for him, that she had begun to trust him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. But hearing him say it, hearing the sincerity in his voice, made everything feel more real. "I care about you too, Eli," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "But there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Eli stepped closer, concern evident in his eyes. "What is it?" "Ava." Ava hesitated. The truth was finally on the tip of her tongue, and she knew it was time to face it. But as she looked into Eli's eyes, she couldn't help but wonder, would he still care for her once he knew everything? Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she looked into Eli's eyes, searching for the right words. She had spent weeks, no months, building a connection with him, creating a bond based on honesty, laughter, and shared struggles. But now, the truth of who she really was, the secret she had been carrying for so long, hung in the air, threatening to break everything apart. Eli stood before her, waiting patiently, his face soft with concern. "Ava," he said, his voice low and steady, "whatever it is, you can tell me. You don't have to hide anything from me." The warmth in his words only made Ava's anxiety grow. She had come to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone else in years. But now, that trust felt fragile. Could he really accept her if he knew the truth? Could he still see her as the same person? Or would everything change? Taking a deep breath, Ava finally spoke. "Eli, the truth is, I'm not who you think I am." She paused, her voice trembling. "I'm not just some girl trying to make it on her own. I'm the daughter of Mr. Anderson, the billionaire, the one who owns all the companies, the mansions, the jets." Eli's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow silent. Ava's words hung in the air between them like a weight, and she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. She quickly continued, her voice rushing out. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to think of me as just his daughter. I left everything behind. The money, the expectations, the pressure. I came here to live on my own terms, to prove that I could survive without all of that. For a moment, Eli didn't say anything. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Ava's heart dropped. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the question of whether this was some kind of cruel joke. But he didn't speak. I'm sorry, Ava whispered, her voice breaking. I should have told you sooner. I never wanted to lie to you. I just didn't know how to tell you without making things complicated. Eli finally took a step back, his face a mix of disbelief and hurt. You're the daughter of one of the richest men in the country, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ava nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. Yes. But I'm not like him. Eli. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be born into this world. Eli looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. But why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret? Ava's chest tightened as she tried to explain. I didn't want you to see me as just a rich girl. I didn't want you to think that's all I was. I wanted to be someone who could stand on her own. I wanted to prove that I didn't need my father's money to be something. To be someone real. Eli ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly as he processed what she had said. Ava. I don't care about your father's money. I care about you. But this secret. It feels like you've been hiding a part of yourself from me. I don't know if I can just ignore that. Ava's heart sank. I didn't want to hurt you. She stopped herself, not sure how to continue. Everything she had worked so hard for, building this connection, this trust, now felt fragile and uncertain. Eli turned away, his back to her. I get it. I do. You wanted to prove something. But why hide it? We've been talking for weeks, Ava. And I didn't even know who you really were. I don't know if I can just forget about that. Ava felt a lump form in her throat. She had risked everything to live authentically, to escape the life that had defined her. But now, she saw how her decision to keep that part of herself hidden had driven a wedge between them. I never meant to deceive you, Eli. I just didn't know how to share all of this. I didn't want it to change what we had. Eli finally turned to face her, his expression softening. It's not just about what you had. It's about honesty. Ava. Trust. If we're going to be friends, if we're going to be anything, I need to know the truth. I can't pretend like I didn't just hear that. Ava nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She had feared this moment, the moment when everything would unravel. The truth, as it often does, had come out in the worst possible way. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. Eli looked at her, his eyes filled with conflict. I don't know what to say right now. This is a lot to take in. He hesitated before adding, I need some time to think. I didn't expect this. I need to figure out what this means for us. Ava's stomach twisted as he walked towards the door. She wanted to say something, anything, to make it right. To explain herself more. But the words stuck in her throat. Eli left the cafe without another word, leaving Ava standing in the silence. The emptiness she felt in that moment was like a heavy stone pressing on her chest. She had told him the truth. But at what cost? Ava didn't know if she had lost him or if there was still hope. What she did know was that this was a turning point. She had revealed her secret. And now she would have to live with the consequences. Whatever they might be. The days following her confession were some of the hardest of Ava's life. Each day at Marnie's cafe felt heavier than the last. The constant noise of the kitchen, the rush of customers, and the endless tasks that kept her moving throughout the day no longer brought her the distraction they once did. Instead, everything reminded her of the conversation with Eli. She couldn't get his words out of her mind, his confusion, his hurt, and his need for space. Ava had given him the truth. But now she was left to wonder if that truth had been worth the price. She had wanted to live a life without the shadow of her father's wealth. A life where she could prove she was more than just the daughter of a billionaire. But as the days went by, the feeling of regret began to creep in. Had she ruined everything? Had she broken the one genuine connection she had ever had? Eli had not come to the cafe since their conversation. She missed him more than she cared to admit. His warm smile. His laughter. The way he made her feel like she could actually be herself. He had become such an integral part of her daily routine. And now, it felt like a gaping hole had formed where he once stood. Ava had tried to reach out to him. She sent a text. A simple message apologizing for the way things had unfolded. She left a voicemail. Her voice shaky, asking for a chance to explain. But there was no response. It was frustrating. She couldn't force him to forgive her. She knew that. But what hurt the most was the silence. The distance that had grown between them seemed insurmountable. As if the secret she had kept for so long had become an irreversible barrier. One evening, as Ava was closing up the cafe after a long shift, Marnie walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at Ava for a moment, her expression softening. "You all right, kid?" she asked. Ava hesitated, glancing up at Marnie. "I don't know," she confessed, her voice quiet. "I think I messed up. I told Eli the truth about who I really am. And now he's gone. He's not talking to me." Marnie sighed and leaned against the counter. "Look, I get it. You're used to being in control, to having everything planned out. But relationships, they're not like that. They take time. You can't just throw everything on the table and expect people to handle it perfectly. You've got to give him space. Ava. And if he's meant to be in your life, he'll come back." Ava nodded, her chest tight. "I don't know if I can wait for him. I don't know if I can fix this." "You don't need to fix anything," Marnie said, her voice steady. "You've done the hardest part, telling the truth. Now you just have to let him process it. If you really care about him, you'll give him that." Ava sat in silence for a moment, contemplating Marnie's words. It wasn't easy to hear. The idea of waiting, of being patient while Eli figured things out, made her feel powerless. But Marnie was right. She couldn't rush him. The damage was done. And now all she could do was hope that Eli would eventually come to understand her decision and forgive her. The next few days passed in a haze. Ava threw herself into work, trying to keep herself busy and distract her mind from the constant worry about Eli. But there were moments, quiet moments when the cafe was empty or when she was alone in her small room at the guest house, when her mind wandered back to him. She missed him. She missed the way he made her feel seen and understood. The way he encouraged her to believe in herself. Then, one afternoon, as Ava was walking to work, she spotted Eli standing in front of the cafe. His back was to her, and he was talking to one of the other workers. Her heart skipped a beat, a mix of excitement and nervousness rushing through her. Could this be the moment? Could he be ready to talk? Eli turned, and their eyes met across the street. Ava felt the tension in her chest, her breath catching. He gave her a small, tentative smile. It wasn't the wide grin she had grown accustomed to, but it was something. A flicker of acknowledgement. A sign that maybe he wasn't as angry as he had been before. She walked toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached him, she opened her mouth to say something, but Eli beat her to it. "Ava," he said quietly, "can we talk?" Her heart leapt. "Of course," she said quickly, nodding. "I'm so sorry, Eli. I know I messed up. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to see me as just his daughter." Eli looked at her for a long moment, his face thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said. About everything. And honestly, I don't know how to feel about all of it. It's a lot to take in. Ava, you've been hiding who you are from me, and it hurt. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I'm sorry. But, Eli continued, his voice softer now, I get it. I understand why you did it. You didn't want me to treat you differently because of your family, and I respect that. I just needed some time to figure out where we stand. Ava felt a weight lift off her shoulders. You're not mad at me anymore? Eli shook his head. I was mad. Yeah. But I don't want to be angry anymore. We've built something real here. And I don't want to throw that away just because of a secret. But I need to know that you're not going to hide things from me again. Ava nodded earnestly. I promise. Eli. No more secrets. No more hiding. He smiled. And for the first time in days, Ava felt like everything might be okay again. As the days passed, Ava and Eli worked through the challenges of rebuilding their relationship. Their bond, once strained by secrets and misunderstandings, grew stronger with each passing day. Ava learned that true connections aren't built on wealth or status, but on honesty, trust, and understanding. Eli, too, learned that love and respect are not defined by one's background, but by the strength of the bond they share. Together, they faced the future with renewed hope, ready to build a life on their own terms. Ava knew that no matter what, she had found something real, something that money could never buy. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Stay tuned for our next video. And thank you for watching Life Stories. Don't forget to click the bell to be notified of new content.